When we think of Italy, we think of the past. We think of the Colosseum, the Renaissance, the Roman Empire. We think of a lifestyle that is the envy of the world, a Dolce Vita, the sweet life. It is a land of beauty, art, and history. To the millions of tourists who flood Venice and Florence every summer, Italy looks like paradise. But to the economists in Frankfurt, Brussels, and New York, Italy looks like something else entirely. It looks like a bomb, a 2.9 trillion euro bomb with a fuse that is burning shorter every single day. For the last decade, the European Union has been playing a dangerous game of pretend. They have pretended that Italy is a solvent nation. They have pretended that the euro currency works for all its members equally. They have pretended that the rules of mathematics do not apply if you just print enough money to cover the cracks. But the era of pretend is over. We are entering a new phase of history where the structural flaws of the Eurozone are colliding with the harsh reality of rising interest rates and demographic collapse. The thesis of this video is simple but terrifying. Italy is mathematically incapable of paying its debts. And because Italy is the third largest economy in the Eurozone, it cannot be bailed out. It is too big to fail, but it is also too big to save. When Italy goes down, it won't just be a national crisis. It will be the end of the euro as we know it. It will be the destruction of the European project. To understand why, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to understand the original sin of the euro. Before 1999, Italy had a secret weapon. It was called the lira. The Italian economy of the 1970s and 80s was chaotic. Yes, inflation was high, governments collapsed every few months, and corruption was rampant. But the economy was dynamic. Italy was a manufacturing powerhouse. It was the workshop of the Mediterranean. Brands like Fiat, Ferrari, Armani, and countless small family-owned factories exported goods all over the world. How did they compete with the efficient Germans? They cheated. Well, not cheated. They used monetary sovereignty. Whenever Italian wages got too high or productivity lagged behind Germany, the Bank of Italy would simply devalue the lira. By making their currency cheaper, they made their exports cheaper for foreign buyers. It was a pressure release valve. It allowed Italy to remain competitive despite its internal structural problems. It hurt the savings of Italian citizens, who saw their purchasing power drop, but it kept the factories humming and employment high. Then came the euro. In the late 90s, the political elite of Europe decided to lock everyone into a single currency. For Italy, this was sold as a ticket to stability. No more high inflation, no more crazy lira fluctuations. Italy would get to borrow money at the same low interest rates as Germany. It sounded like a dream, but in reality, it was a trap. When Italy adopted the euro, it threw away its pressure release valve. It locked itself into a currency value that was too high for its economy, while Germany locked itself into a currency value that was too low for its economy. This gave Germany a massive competitive advantage. German exports became artificially cheap, flooding the world. Italian exports became artificially expensive. Without the ability to devalue the currency, Italy had only one way to compete: internal devaluation. This is a fancy economist term for making people poorer. If you can't lower the value of your currency, you have to lower the wages of your workers to cut costs. But in a democracy with strong unions, cutting wages is political suicide. So Italy didn't do it. Instead, they stagnated. Since joining the euro in 1999, Italy has had virtually zero net economic growth. Let that sink in. For a quarter of a century, while the rest of the world grew, China rose, and the US tech sector exploded, Italy stood still. Real GDP per capita in Italy today is roughly the same as it was in the late 90s. It is a lost generation. But while the economy stood still, the debt did not. This brings us to the debt trap. Because Italy could borrow in euros, effectively borrowing on Germany's credit card, the interest rates on Italian debt plummeted in the early 2000s. The Italian government looked at these low rates and said, "Great, we can borrow more." They didn't use the cheap money to reform the economy, build infrastructure, or modernize their education system. They used it to maintain the status quo. They used it to pay for a bloated pension system and a massive public sector. Today, Italy's public debt stands at roughly 140% of GDP. In nominal terms, it is nearly 3 trillion euros. Now, you might say, Japan has 260% debt to GDP, and the US is at 120%. So why is Italy the problem? This is the most important question. And the answer lies in who controls the printing press. Japan borrows in yen. The Bank of Japan can print yen to pay the debt. The US borrows in dollars. The Fed can print dollars. They can never technically go bankrupt because they can always create the money to pay the bondholders. It causes inflation, yes, but it avoids default. Italy borrows in euros. Italy cannot print euros. Only the European Central Bank, ECB, in Frankfurt can print euros. And the ECB is not run by Italians. It is a committee representing 20 different countries, dominated by the fiscally conservative Northern Europeans, Germany, Netherlands, Finland. This means Italy is effectively borrowing in a foreign currency. It faces a solvency risk. If the bond markets decide that Italy cannot pay, they will stop lending to Italy. The interest rates on Italian bonds, the BTPs, will skyrocket. Italy will run out of cash. And unlike the US or Japan, Rome cannot just call the central bank and order them to turn on the printers. They have to beg Frankfurt. We saw a preview of this movie in 2011. During the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis, the market turned on Italy. The yield on Italian 10-year bonds spiked over 7%. The government was on the brink of collapse. Silvio Berlusconi was forced to resign. The country was saved only because Mario Draghi, the head of the ECB, uttered 3 magic words: whatever it takes. He promised that the ECB would buy enough bonds to stop the panic. The markets believed him. The crisis ended. But whatever it takes was not a solution. It was a band-aid. It kicked the can down the road. And now we're at the end of the road. The ECB has been artificially suppressing Italian borrowing costs for a decade by buying billions of euros of Italian debt. This is called quantitative easing, QE. Effectively, the ECB became the lender of last resort for Italy. But in 2022, inflation returned. To fight inflation, the ECB had to stop printing money and start raising interest rates. They stopped buying Italian bonds. This exposed the naked truth. Without the ECB buying the debt, nobody wants it at the current price. This creates the doom loop. The doom loop is the toxic relationship between the Italian government and the Italian banks. When foreign investors stopped buying Italian debt, the Italian government pressured domestic Italian banks to buy it. Today, Italian banks hold hundreds of billions of euros of their own government's debt. It is a suicide pact. If the government defaults, the banks go bankrupt. If the banks go bankrupt, the government has to bail them out, which increases the debt, causing a default. They are 2 drowning swimmers clinging to each other, dragging each other down. And the economic rot that feeds this debt is structural. It's not just about money, it's about people. Italy is dying, literally. Italy has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. The population is shrinking. The average age is soaring. Italy is rapidly becoming a gigantic nursing home. This is an economic catastrophe. A shrinking workforce means fewer taxpayers to pay for the debt. An aging population means more pension spending and more healthcare costs. The math is brutal. In a few decades, there will be virtually 1 retiree for every 1 worker. That worker would need to pay 50% or 60% tax rates just to keep the retirees alive. But they won't do that. They will leave. This is the brain drain. The smartest, most ambitious young Italians are fleeing the country. They are moving to London, Berlin, Zurich, or New York. They are tired of a country where the only way to get a job is through connections, raccomandazione, where wages are stagnant and where taxes are crushing. When the youth leave, they take the future with them. Italy is left with the old, the unproductive, and the government employees. This depresses productivity even further, which lowers GDP growth, which makes the debt to GDP ratio even worse. It is a death spiral. But the problem isn't just national, it is regional. The Mezzogiorno problem. Italy is effectively 2 countries. The north, Milan, Turin, Venice, is rich, industrialized, and functions like Switzerland or Germany. The south, Naples, Sicily, Calabria, is poor, agrarian, and suffers from massive unemployment and organized crime. For decades, the north has subsidized the south. Fiscal transfers flow from Milan to Naples, but this creates political resentment. The Northern League, now just the League, was founded on the idea that the north should stop paying for the south. Now, zoom out. This north-south dynamic inside Italy is exactly the same dynamic inside Europe. Germany and the Netherlands are the north of Italy. Italy and Greece are the south of Italy. The Germans are tired of subsidizing the Italians. The German Constitutional Court has repeatedly challenged the legality of the ECB's bond-buying programs. The German taxpayer asks a simple question: why should I work until 67 and pay high taxes so that an Italian can retire at 62 and pay lower taxes while my government bails out their government? It is a valid question. And as the economy slows down, the political willingness to keep writing checks is evaporating. This brings us to the mechanism of the collapse. Target 2. This is the most boring, technical, and terrifying part of the Eurozone crisis that nobody talks about. Target 2 is the payment system of the Eurozone. When money moves from Italy to Germany to buy a German car, or because an Italian investor is scared and moves their savings to a German bank, it creates a balance. The Bank of Italy owes the Bundesbank, German central bank, money. In a normal world, these balances would be settled. Italy would have to pay up. But in the Eurozone, the balances are just allowed to grow forever. Currently, the Bank of Italy owes the Euro system over €500 billion in Target 2 liabilities. Germany is owed over $1 trillion. This represents capital flight. It is a measure of how much money has fled Italy for the safety of the North. If the euro breaks up, this money is gone. The Bundesbank would lose €1 trillion. This is why Germany is terrified of an Italian default. It's not just about the bonds, it's about the central bank balance sheet. Italy holds a financial gun to Germany's head. The gun is loaded with Target 2 liabilities. So, what is the trigger? What causes the explosion? There are 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, the bond market vigilantes. Inflation stays sticky. The ECB is forced to keep interest rates high for longer than expected. The interest payments on Italy's debt swell to unmanageable levels. Currently, Italy spends almost as much on interest payments as it does on education. The deficit widens. The credit rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, downgrade Italy to junk status. If Italian debt is rated junk, many pension funds and insurance companies are legally required to sell it. This triggers a massive sell-off. Yields spike to 8%, 9%, 10%. The ECB tries to intervene, but the Germans say 9. The liquidity dries up. Rome defaults. Scenario 2, the political revolt. A populist government in Rome decides they have had enough of austerity. They look at the stagnant economy and say, the euro is the problem. They propose a parallel currency, something they have discussed before called mini-bots. Or they simply refuse to follow Brussels' budget rules. The EU threatens to cut off funding. The Italian government calls a referendum on the euro. The moment a referendum is announced, there's a bank run. Every Italian with a savings account tries to move their euros to Switzerland or Germany before they are converted back into worthless new liras. The banking system collapses overnight. Capital controls are imposed. The eurozone fractures. Scenario 3, the external shock. A global recession hits. Maybe it starts in the US commercial real estate sector, maybe in China. Risk assets sell off everywhere. Investors flee to safety, US treasuries, German bonds. They dump the riskiest assets. In Europe, the riskiest asset is Italian debt. The spread, the difference between Italian and German bond yields, explodes. The doom loop activates. But wait, you might ask, won't the ECB just save them again? Won't they create a new acronym, a new program to print money? They invented the TPI, Transmission Protection Instrument, recently. It has a tool that allows the ECB to buy the bonds of a specific country if its borrowing costs get too high, provided that country follows the rules. But here's the catch. To use the tool, Italy has to submit to strict fiscal discipline dictated by Brussels. They have to cut spending. They have to reform pensions. But the Italian voters voted for a government that promised tax cuts and spending. It is a deadlock. If the ECB prints money to save Italy without conditions, the Germans will sue and potentially leave the euro, or the German central bank will stop participating. If the ECB demands austerity as the price for saving Italy, the Italian government will refuse, claiming it violates their sovereignty. There is no mathematical solution that satisfies both the Italian voter and the German saver. And this is why the euro is doomed. A currency union without a fiscal union cannot survive. In the United States, if Mississippi is poor and New York is rich, the federal government collects taxes from New York and sends Social Security checks to Mississippi. It is automatic. Nobody complains too much because they are all Americans. They share a language, a culture, and a federal government. Europe is not a country. A German does not view an Italian as a compatriot in the same way. There is no federal treasury of Europe to transfer wealth automatically. There is only the central bank, trying to paper over the differences with printed money. But you cannot print culture. You cannot print productivity. Italy's productivity problem is deep-rooted. It is a land of micro-businesses. The average Italian company has fewer than 4 employees. In Germany, it's vastly higher. Small companies don't invest in R&D. They don't digitize. They are inefficient. But Italy protects these small businesses because they are the social fabric of the country. 2. Modernize. Italy would mean bankrupting thousands of family businesses and destroying the way of life. Italy is choosing stagnation over the pain of modernization, and the bureaucracy is legendary. It takes years to enforce a contract in Italian courts. If a company doesn't pay you, good luck getting your money. Foreign investors know this, so they stay away. Foreign direct investment, FDI, in Italy is pathetically low compared to its size. So, let's look at the endgame. If Italy defaults, it is not like Greece defaulting. Greece was 2% of the Eurozone GDP. It was a painful wart that could be removed. Italy is the 3rd largest economy. It is the core. An Italian default would instantly bankrupt the French banking system, which is heavily exposed to Italian debt. It would blow €1 trillion hole in the German central bank. It would cause the euro to collapse against the dollar. The chaos would be unimaginable. ATMs would stop working. Supply chains would halt. It would be a financial crisis worse than 1929. Because the stakes are so high, the politicians will do everything to delay it. They will use financial repression. They will force Italian savers to buy Italian debt. They will change the rules to make it harder to move money out of the country. They will tax wealth. They will try to inflate the debt away by keeping inflation higher than interest rates for years. This means that if you are holding euros, or if you are an Italian saver, you are the one paying for this bailout. You are paying through the slow theft of inflation and the erosion of your savings. Italy is a beautiful tragedy. It is a country that has been failed by its elite for 30 years. They traded their sovereignty for a seat at the European table, but the chair was too expensive. They borrowed from the future to keep the party going in the present. But the party is over. The lights are coming on. And the bill is sitting on the table. Nobody has the money to pay it. The Italian problem is the elephant in the room at every EU summit. They talk about Ukraine, and they talk about climate change, they talk about AI. But they whisper about Italy. They know the numbers. They know the demographics. They know it is unsustainable. But in politics, knowing the truth and acting on it are two different things. To fix Italy would require pain that no politician is willing to inflict. So they wait. They wait for the market to force their hand. When the market finally wakes up, when the bond vigilantes return, they will not be merciful. The spread will widen. The panic will set in. And the euro, the grand experiment of a continent, will face its final exam. Italy will likely fail that exam. And in failing, it will bring the classroom down with it. The irony is that the symbol of the Renaissance, the rebirth of civilization, might be the trigger for the collapse of the modern European economic order. So when you see headlines about Italian budget deficits or BTP spreads or ECB emergency meetings, do not tune out. Do not think it is just boring finance. It is the sound of the tectonic plates of Europe shifting. It is the sound of the next global crisis loading into the chamber. Italy is the debt bomb that nobody wants to talk about, but physics and mathematics do not care about silence. A bomb does not stop being a bomb just because you ignore it. It just ticks louder. And right now, the ticking is getting deafening. The tragedy of the situation is that the Italian people are among the most creative, resilient, and hardworking in the world when given the chance. But they are trapped in a system that punishes innovation and rewards stagnation. They are trapped in a currency that does not fit them. They are trapped in a debt prison built by their grandfathers. The story of Italy is a warning to the rest of the world. It is a warning about what happens when you let debt accumulate for decades. It is a warning about what happens when you have a common currency without a common treasury. It is a warning about demographics. We are all becoming Italy. The US, with its aging population and soaring debt, is on the same path, just 20 years behind. Germany is aging even faster, but Italy is the first one to the edge of the cliff. As we watch the events unfold in Rome and Frankfurt over the next few years, remember this. Systems that are unsustainable eventually stop. It is not a question of if, but when. For the euro and for Italy, the when is approaching fast. The debt bomb is primed, the fuse is lit, and there is nobody left with a pair of scissors to cut it. The only question left is, how big will the explosion be? And the answer is, big enough to change the world.